Honestly, I think if I'm going to tell this story right, I need to start all the way back in my childhood. I was probably around 5 or 6 when my parents made a big decision and bought a holiday caravan down on the south coast, somewhere near Weymouth. From that moment on, every school break meant we'd head down there and stay for the whole holiday. Now, my dad couldn't always make it out to the caravan with us every time, since his job kept him busy most of the year. So, for most trips, it was just my mom, my 2 sisters, and me making the journey. After a couple years of this, Dad went out and got us a bigger caravan, and pretty soon we were inviting a rotating cast of friends and relatives to come join us, just to escape the city for a while. There were quite a few other families from all over the place who kept their own caravans on the same site. So whenever Mom took us down by herself, and we didn't have Dad's car to get around in, my sisters and I would just roam the site or the surrounding area. Having a family car in the 50s was a bit of a luxury, not many folks had one back then, and unfortunately, Mom never really figured out how to drive. She tried a few times and apparently managed to scare the wits out of more than one driving instructor before she finally gave up. There were always other kids hanging around the site for me to play with. My sisters always acted like they were too grown up to play with the little kids, especially boys. The one kid who really became my closest friend down there was Harry. Harry was about a year older than me, but for some reason, we just clicked right from the start. She had this big red birthmark covering the left side of her face, and for reasons I couldn't understand as a kid, most of the other kids tended to avoid her. The birthmark never really bothered me, though, and honestly, Harry was such a tomboy that she turned out to be the best buddy I could have asked for during those holidays. Truth is, if Harry's family didn't show up in Weymouth for a particular school break, I'd find the place dull as dishwater. Harry was an only child, and to be honest, we felt more like brother and sister than just friends. My 2 older sisters were, well, a bit too high and mighty for their own good when they were young. As the years rolled on and we started getting older, Harry and I lost interest in climbing cliffs or skipping rocks into the sea. We'd already explored every little corner of the place. We even found all the best hiding spots where we could secretly watch young couples sneaking off together, trying to figure out what they were up to, which was a real mystery at 10 years old. But as we got older and started to understand a bit more about life, we'd end up feeling kind of awkward watching them, so we stopped. We never talked about it, but we were close enough that we always seemed to know what the other was thinking. By then, Harry and I were considered old enough to catch the bus into Weymouth by ourselves, so we started exploring the town and the harbor. There were times when people would make rude comments about Harry's birthmark, and I even ended up in a couple scuffles over it. I could always tell it hurt Harry's feelings when folks said stuff about her face. I guess I was around 12 when Harry started wearing makeup to cover up her birthmark. Honestly, I thought the makeup drew even more attention to it, but I never told her that. Harry and I started going to the club dances at the caravan site. We'd been there lots of times over the years. They'd have kids' entertainment in the morning, dancing for the little ones in the afternoon, then the older kids got their turn in the early evening, and finally, the adults would take over later on. But now, Harry and I were joining in with the older kids. The bouncers at the club were old pals of ours by that point. If anyone ever tried to give Harry a hard time about her birthmark, usually the bouncers were there to step in before I even had a chance to say anything. I think they knew I wouldn't stand for anyone picking on her. Then, when I was 15, something happened that I'll never forget. Harry just disappeared. My whole family headed down to Weymouth the Thursday before Good Friday, and the first thing I did was run over to Harry's caravan, but it was still all locked up from winter. When I asked around at the site office, they told me the caravan had been sold. The rest of that holiday was the worst I can remember. Mom and Dad tried to cheer me up by taking me out every day. Later on, Dad told me he'd tried to find out what happened to Harry and her family. Years after, he finally told me that Harry's dad had passed away from the flu that winter, and her mom just couldn't afford to keep the caravan, so she'd had to sell it. Dad hoped he could track down their address so I could at least write to Harry, but he never managed to find it. Funny thing is, Harry and I never thought to exchange addresses or keep in touch outside of Weymouth. All I knew was she lived somewhere near Bath. After Harry was gone, going down to Weymouth didn't mean much to me anymore. That summer, I stayed home with Dad while Mom and my sisters went to Weymouth without us. Dad and I joined them just for his summer break, but the rest of my vacation I just hung around with my buddies from school. The next year, Mom decided it was time for us to try something new. Everyone was going abroad for their summer holidays. By then, my sisters were dating, and I'm pretty sure they were pressuring her to stop dragging them away from their boyfriends for so long every year. We sold the caravan and the whole family set out for a couple weeks in the sun, not by plane, but by train, and it took a full 24 hours to get there. I went with them on their first trips to Rimini, Italy, but by the time I was 18, I was more interested in traveling with my own friends, so I stopped tagging along. Pop festivals were all the rage then, so that's where my buddies and I would head every chance we got. It was the 60s, and we really made the most of it for a few wild years. After college, I bounced around a bunch of different jobs but just couldn't seem to settle anywhere. By that time, I was the proud owner of a 1959 Hillman Minx, which, for me, felt like my own private getaway car. One day, after my boss said something that rubbed me the wrong way, don't ask me what, I honestly can't remember, I told him where he could stick his job, which I didn't like much anyway, and I just walked out. Not long after, I was stopped at a red light when someone rear-ended my Hillman. I got out and found a truck driver who apologized over and over. I don't really remember the details of our conversation, but it ended with me following him back to his work yard, where his boss promised to pay for a new bumper and get it fixed up for me. The next day, I took my car to their yard to get the new bumper fitted, and while I was waiting in the office, something pretty odd happened. A guy stuck his head in and told me to come with him, and without really thinking about it, I just followed along. I still don't know why I didn't ask him what he wanted, but the next thing I knew, I was sitting in the driver's seat of a big lorry while he pointed out all the controls and explained the gears. Then he said, "Okay, take it out the gate and turn left," and I just started it up and did what he told me. We drove around for about half an hour before heading back to the yard. When we got back, he told me, "You'll do. You're a natural at this." Then he hopped out and headed toward the office. I followed him inside, and the boss I'd met the day before came out of his office and said, "Mitch, didn't I ask you to give this guy a driving appraisal?" Mitch replied, "I did. He's the one." The boss just laughed and said, "How'd you pull that off when he's still sitting in my office?" So there I was, out of work, but that's how I landed the job, and not the other guy. The next Monday, I was officially a truck driver, and I've got to say, I loved it. For the first few months, I was totally green and barely knew what I was doing, but I had a knack for directions, and back then, drivers really looked out for each other. I owe a lot to those folks who taught me how to load a truck the right way and how to tie everything down securely. It turned out that being on the road fit my personality. It was the first job where I really felt at home. Pretty soon, some of the companies started asking my boss to send me when they needed a truck, and I figured he was happy with that. It meant I was keeping his customers satisfied. One of the regular spots I picked up loads from was called Marshall's. There was a girl who worked in the dispatch office there, named Thelma. Thelma really turned heads, she always dressed to impress, and the guys would practically trip over themselves for her attention. Her outfits always showed off her figure, and she knew exactly how to walk in high heels. I pegged Thelma as a bit of a flirt the first time I ever saw her at Marshall's. Now, I've never been the kind of guy to lose my cool just because a woman looks good. I let the other fellas chase after her while I kept things strictly professional. Since she ran the dispatch desk, I dealt with her every time I came by for a load. After a while, I noticed I was working at Marshall's more and more, to the point it felt like I was practically on their payroll, along with a couple other drivers from our company. Honestly, I liked it there, it felt more like a big family than a company, which was rare. We had the run of the place while we waited for our loads, including free reign of the canteen. Old man Marshall, the owner, took pride in knowing every single person who worked for him, over 200 folks, and pretty soon, he knew my name and the other drivers' names too. One Friday night in early December, I rolled into our yard to fill up my tank and pick up my pay. When I walked into the office, my boss, Mr. Wilkins, stepped out and asked, "So, what are you up to tomorrow, son?" He'd asked me that plenty of times before, it usually meant he wanted me to take a run on a Saturday. I said, "Nothing special." "What have you got for me, boss?" He replied, "You got a decent suit? We're headed to Marshall's Christmas party. He invites us every year, and if we don't show up, the old guy gets upset." I said, "Works for me, boss. I clean up pretty well when I need to." "All right," he said. "Meet me here at the yard at 6:30. George and Jack are driving up together, but there'll be plenty of room in my car for you. You can ride with me and the wife." I was a little curious why George and Jack weren't riding with the boss, since his big Jag could easily fit all of us, but I didn't ask any questions. The next afternoon, I was feeling pretty overdressed since I hadn't had a reason to put on a suit since I'd started trucking. I climbed into my boss's car, ready for the ride to Marshall's factory, where the Christmas party was being held in their huge canteen. For the Christmas party, Mr. Wilson insisted I call him Bill for the evening, even though I knew come Monday, he'd be back to boss like nothing ever happened. He introduced me to his wife, and I couldn't help but wonder how a regular guy like him managed to end up with such a beautiful woman. I figured it probably had something to do with money, but that wasn't really important for this story. When we showed up at Marshall's for the party, George and Jack, along with their wives, joined up with us right away. That's when I realized why they hadn't ridden with us in the first place. I couldn't help but notice I hadn't been told I could bring a guest, not that I had anyone in mind, but if wives were invited, I figured girlfriends were probably welcome too. I just chalked it up to Bill Wilkins forgetting to mention it. Bill and his wife took their seats at the head table with Old Man Marshall, his wife, and a bunch of the other big shots and company bosses. The rest of us wandered around looking for our assigned seats. It took me a while, and I started to wonder if they'd forgotten about me entirely. To be honest, if I couldn't find my place, I was planning to sneak outside and wait until the meal was over. Right about then, Thelma showed up, tapped me on the shoulder, and guided me over to my spot, which just happened to be right next to hers. Come on, I'm not totally clueless. Thelma was sitting in the seat where my guest would have been, if I'd brought one. And I was in the spot meant for her date. I couldn't shake the feeling I'd been set up on purpose. While we were getting settled, Old Man Marshall made his way around the tables. When he got to me, he thanked me for coming and for all the work I'd done. Then he said, "Well, son, our lovely Thelma here didn't have anyone to bring tonight. Mind keeping her company for me?" I told him I'd be glad to, but deep down, I was curious why Thelma didn't have a date lined up in the first place. Dinner was served by outside caterers, since all the canteen staff were guests at the party too. Some of them were at our table, and I noticed them watching every move the caterers made, making sure everything was up to snuff. I doubt any meal was ever inspected so closely. After dinner, there were a bunch of speeches that seemed to drag on forever. Eventually, the tables were pushed to the sides, and a band started up, playing good old middle-of-the-road tunes so folks of all ages could enjoy. Thelma and I danced together for a while, but other guys kept coming up, asking her for a turn. By 10:30 or so, I'd had a few more drinks than I probably needed. During a slow dance with Thelma, one that was, let's just say, a little more romantic than usual, I asked her how it happened that she didn't have a date for the party. Thelma giggled, and I could tell she'd had her fair share of the punch, too. She said, "Don't be silly. I could have brought any number of guys, but I wanted to spend the evening with you." "Why's that?" I asked. She looked at me. "Do you really want to know?" I grinned. "Wouldn't ask if I didn't." "Well, you interest me," she said. "Oh, I'm interesting now, am I? And what's so interesting about me?" She shrugged and smiled. "You know, you're different from the rest. You don't chase after me like the other guys do. I'm just curious, don't you find me attractive, or are you, more into men or something?" "Thelma, no, I'm definitely not that way," I told her, laughing. "And you're a very attractive young woman." "So you've got a steady girlfriend then?" she asked. "Nope. Not at the moment," I said. "Then how come you've never asked me out? Did I ever do something to bother you?" "Quite the opposite," I replied. "You're a great girl. But you're, what, 18, 19? 19, she said. "Well, I'm 24, and I'm gone most of the week with my job, sometimes overnight. What I'm looking for is something steady. Someone I can come home to on Friday nights and maybe head down to the pub with. Somebody who won't be off with other guys when I'm out on the road for a few days. If you were looking for just a date or two, well, you got that tonight. But honestly, I don't think you're ready to settle down yet. You have too much fun with all the attention you get." "Oh, is that it?" she said. "Yeah, that's pretty much it. Hope you're not upset," I told her. She said, maybe a little disappointed. "But can I at least get you under the mistletoe tonight?" "Absolutely," I said with a grin. "Be my guest." After that, I got the impression Thelma was trying to prove a point. Every time we danced, we'd somehow end up under that darn mistletoe again. Around 1 in the morning, George came over to tell me Mr. Wilkins was ready to head out. I gave Thelma a friendly kiss goodnight as we walked to the car. As we pulled away, I looked back and saw another fella walking up and putting his arm around her. The next week I was working a different contract, so I didn't get over to Marshall's. After that, they closed down for Christmas. The boss roped me into a special job right after Boxing Day, which meant I had to spend New Year's up in Aberdeen. Back then, oil exploration was just getting started in the North Sea, and I was hauling some research equipment they needed right away. The weather was miserable. I spent nearly 2 weeks parked on the harbor, waiting for the ship to come in so I could unload. Still, I made the most of it. There's honestly no better place in the world to ring in the new year than Scotland, even if it's blowing a gale, pouring rain, and cold as anything. By the time the ship finally showed up, though, the novelty had worn off. Turns out it had been hiding from the storm in a different port farther up the coast, but nobody thought to let me know to meet them there. I guess as far as everyone was concerned, I was just the truck driver, not worth the trouble to send a message. When I finally got back home, I took a couple days off to make up for missing the holidays. I'm not sure the boss was thrilled, but he knew I had a reputation for speaking my mind, and honestly, back then, if you were good at driving, you could always find another job. That Wednesday morning, I was parked on Marshall's loading bay bright and early. When I walked into the dispatch office, I barely recognized Thelma. She was wearing a loose sweater, slacks, and had her hair pulled back in a ponytail. The minute she spotted me, she jumped up, ran over, and threw her arms around my neck, nearly knocked the wind out of me. Before I could even get a word out, she planted a big kiss on me, so enthusiastic, I thought she was trying to see if I still had tonsils. Good grief, Thelma. Trying to smother me or what? I managed when I finally caught my breath. She laughed and said, I missed you. So, do I pass inspection now? I hesitated. Look, Thelma, I don't know what to say. She looked me in the eye. Do I still look like some silly girl who just wants to run around with a different guy every night? I never said that, I replied. Maybe not, but you hinted at it. So, do I make the cut as your girl now? Of course you do. You always have, but... She cut me off. Good. So I'll expect you to pick me up Friday night. Here's my address, and here are your delivery notes for the week. Oh, and I arranged things so you can finish up early Friday. Now get moving, you've got a lot to get done today and tomorrow. Honestly, at that point, there was nothing I could say that wouldn't risk upsetting her. So, like a good sport, I gave her a quick kiss and headed out to load up my truck. That Friday night, I pulled up outside Thelma's place right at 7. She came out carrying a small overnight bag, which caught me off guard. What's with the bag, Thelma? I asked, feeling a little nervous. She smiled and said, well, I figured you wanted to go to your local pub, and that's got to be at least 35 miles from here. I thought maybe I could just stay over at your place for the weekend. That way, you wouldn't have to keep driving back and forth to pick me up and drop me off. So that weekend, Thelma stayed at my parents' house, not in my room, but in my sister's old room, since both of them had already gotten married and moved out. She seemed to fit in just fine. The next weekend, I spent the night at her parents' place, and we checked out some of the pubs around her neighborhood. Her folks were welcoming, especially her dad and her younger brother. I got along with them right away. Her mom seemed a little unsure about me at first, but she warmed up eventually. Honestly, from that first weekend, Thelma had me pretty well wrapped around her finger. From then on, she never wore anything at work, or anywhere else, really, that you could call provocative. But when we went out together, she'd dress up like she was heading to a fancy party. I couldn't help but notice. It didn't take long for me to realize Thelma wasn't exactly new to relationships. Not that I'd ever assumed she was. I did find out, though, that she couldn't take the birth control pill because it didn't agree with her. So we didn't get too carried away too often, and we always made sure to be careful. 3 months later, we got engaged. Before I knew it, we'd put down a deposit on an old fixer-upper almost halfway between our parents' houses. We spent nearly every spare minute that next year fixing the place up, basically dragging it into the modern age. Once the house was finally done, getting married just seemed like the next logical step. So that's what we did. Our wedding reception was held right there in the Marshall's canteen, with the canteen staff handling the food. Old man Marshall showed up, gave us his blessing, and told me how happy he was to see us together. I never was sure just how much of Thelma's plan he was in on, but later I'd find out Thelma was pretty skilled at getting folks to help her out when she wanted something. Life was good for a while. Thelma got pregnant not long after we tied the knot. We mostly used protection, but as any newlyweds will tell you, sometimes you get caught up in the moment. Our first child, Tracy, came along pretty soon. We decided right away that we wanted a second, so Helen was born not too long after. 2 kids was enough for us, so Thelma took steps to make sure we didn't have any surprises. She'd had a tough pregnancy with Helen, and the doctors were cautious. They had her in the hospital early to keep an eye on things. One day, while Thelma was still carrying Tracy, I got a call from old man Marshall. Turns out, his transport manager was about to retire, and with Thelma on maternity leave, he was in a bit of a bind. He'd already spoken to Bill Wilkins, my old boss, and asked if I'd step in as transport manager, at least until Thelma came back to work. It actually worked out pretty well, since I'd be close to home when Thelma gave birth, and I wouldn't have to be running all over the country while she was caring for our baby. So, even though I was a little unsure at first, I agreed. The only catch was that by the time we decided to have our second child, my role at Marshall's had turned into a permanent position. The work wasn't tough, it mostly took some know-how about vehicles and a knack for planning good routes. After a while, I started to enjoy it. It wasn't as much fun as being out on the road, but the pay was better, and I didn't have to work any overtime. Honestly, I was glad to have more time with our two little girls. I could already tell they'd probably grow up to be heartbreakers like their mom. I could see some wild times ahead, but I figured I'd handle it when the time came. So, life just rolled on, kind of like it does for most couples with young kids. I really believed I'd made it: steady job, nice house, loving wife, and two amazing daughters. But sometimes, trouble shows up when you least expect it. If I had to pick a moment when I first started to feel like something wasn't right, it was when Tracy had just turned 6. I was driving to work one morning and noticed the car behind me. Sure, I know roads are public, but what I mean is, this wasn't just any old car, it was the car behind me. You've got to remember, after driving trucks for a few years, you learn to keep an eye on your mirrors and know what's going on around you. Sometimes, if you're hauling valuable cargo, you want to be sure no one's following you with bad intentions. Or it could be an unmarked police car. So if you're smart, you pay attention. This particular car stayed right behind me, no matter what. Every time we hit a junction, if it got left behind, it would speed up and catch back up to me. I knew it wasn't a cop. Cops drive a lot better than this guy did, but it was obvious someone was tailing me. That evening, when I left work, a different car picked up where the first one left off. This time, it was a woman driving, and she followed me all the way home. Next morning, the same guy was behind me again, and that night, the woman followed me all the way to the pub. Thursday nights I'd go out for a drink, just one, since I was driving, and play snooker with some of my crew. We hadn't been in the pub long when I saw her come in, and soon after, the guy walked in too. They each went to the bar and bought their own drinks, acting like they didn't know each other. Then things started to get almost comical. There I was, playing snooker, and this woman sitting at the bar, showing off and staring at me like she could burn a hole through my back. A couple of times, I caught her eye, and every time she just smiled. I had no idea who was trying to set me up or why, but there was no way I was going to fall for it. I'm not sure what kind of fool they took me for, but I wasn't playing their game. I thought maybe I had the answer. Old man Marshall was all about family, he ran the whole business like one big clan. And here I was, the outsider, brought in because I married one of his favorite employees. I'd become a bit of a favorite myself, and word was I was climbing the ladder at Marshall's. I figured maybe someone got jealous, or maybe they thought I was a threat for a promotion down the line. Maybe they thought they could set me up, get me to mess up my marriage, and ruin my reputation with old man Marshall. I finished my drink and ordered another, just to keep up appearances. Then, after a quick sip, I headed to the men's room, except instead of going back to the bar, I slipped out the back door. I would have liked to turn the tables on them, but since I didn't know who was really behind it, I just drove myself home. I couldn't help but wonder how long they waited for me to come back. Next morning, the guy was on my tail again, but this time I managed to lose him without too much trouble. That evening, as I left Marshall's yard, the woman started following me almost right away. I decided to take her on a little tour, which ended up at a quiet industrial estate I knew well from my trucking days, a dead end. I parked my car and slipped between the buildings so she couldn't see me, then doubled back and surprised her by showing up right at her car door. The moment she realized what was happening, she threw her car in reverse, tore out of there with a move that would have made any stunt driver proud, and disappeared before I could even get her license plate. I was mad at myself for letting her get away, but I went home, figuring that was the end of it. For a while, they seemed to leave me alone, and I assumed once they realized I was onto them, they gave up. But about 2 weeks later, there was another woman at the bar when I came in for my Thursday night drink. She made a comment as I ordered, and at first, I didn't connect her with the others. It wasn't until she joined me at the jukebox that it all clicked. I turned to her and said, "You can just forget it, lady. Tell your friends I'm not as stupid as I look. And you can tell that guy with the Granada that if I ever see him again, he's going to regret it." She looked genuinely surprised, maybe even a little scared, and she left the pub almost right away. I'd noticed the Ford Granada in the lot when I arrived, but hadn't seen the driver. It must have been about a month after all that when Thelma had a little accident. She was back to wearing those high heels and tripped, breaking her ankle. I got a frantic call from her at the hospital, asking me to come pick up the girls. When I got there, The doctor told me the break wasn't bad, but they couldn't put a cast on until the swelling went down, so Thelma had to stay in the hospital for a couple of days. That meant I had to take a few days off work to look after the girls since it was school's summer holidays. Honestly, it was kind of fun playing both mom and dad for a bit. The girls thought it was hilarious to tease me about my cooking. I'm no chef, trying to get everything to finish cooking at the same time just about drove me nuts. Anyway, one evening while I was trying to juggle dinner, the phone rang. My hands were full, so I asked Tracy to answer it. She was 6, but we taught her what to say. I heard her on the phone. "Oh, sorry, Uncle Frank, Mommy's in the hospital. She hurt her leg. No, Daddy's looking after us. Bye-bye." Then she hung up and turned to me. I asked, "Who was that, Tracy?" She replied, "Oh, just Uncle Frank." There was just one thing that stuck with me after Tracy hung up the phone. Who on earth was Uncle Frank? I'd never even heard that name before, not in connection with our family. I was about to ask her more, but just then Helen called Tracy from the other room, and Tracy went running off. I followed her out of curiosity, but for some reason I just lingered at the doorway instead of walking all the way in. That's when I heard Helen say, "You're going to get in trouble with Mommy. You promised you'd never tell Daddy about Uncle Frank." My mind stopped for a second. Did my daughter really just say that? I waited and then heard Tracy answer, just like any 6-year-old would, "I didn't tell Daddy about Uncle Frank." Then came the usual back and forth between sisters, "You did too, did not?" And so on. I decided to stay out of it. Clearly, both girls knew they weren't supposed to mention this Uncle Frank to me, and if I butted in, I'd only make them more careful. I figured it'd be smarter to lay low and hope they'd eventually slip up when their guard was down. But I'll be honest, my mind was racing. I couldn't make sense of why Thelma would want to keep some man a secret from me. Unless. Well, I didn't even want to think about that. Denial's a strong thing, and I guess I just didn't want to go there. The next day, Thelma's ankle still hadn't gone down in swelling. Actually, to me, it looked even worse than before. The nurse told me it might take a week to get back to normal. That's when I realized I should probably get some extra help at home, before my girls starved or got food poisoning from my cooking. My sister Sarah volunteered to come and stay for a bit, which really took a load off. She brought her daughter Marcy along, who was 9. Now, I'll be honest, Marcy reminded me a bit too much of her mother. Growing up, Sarah and I hadn't always gotten along, but we'd become closer over the years. I'm not sure what made me do it, maybe I just needed to get it off my chest, but I ended up telling Sarah about this mysterious Uncle Frank. Maybe my girls had been sworn to keep it from me, but Thelma hadn't said anything about telling their aunt. Sarah sat there thinking for a while, then said, "Do you think Thelma's?" I shook my head. I don't know what to think, but I really don't like secrets in my own house. Sarah smirked and said, "Is that why you hated Ginny and me as kids? We never told you anything." Maybe so, I admitted. But I'm not going to sit by while my wife hides something from me, especially if it involves another man. She laughed and said, "Can't blame you. Thelma is beautiful. I never did figure out how you landed her." "That's the thing," I said. "I didn't land Thelma, she chased after me." Sarah just grinned. "Well, she's got good taste, I'll give her that. So, what are you looking for? Want me to ask the girls about Frank?" "Yeah, I thought maybe they'd open up to you. I actually heard Helen say Thelma told them not to tell me about Frank. Maybe they'll feel like they aren't breaking trust if they talk to you." Sarah nodded. "Leave it to me. I'll see what I can find out, but I'll keep it low-key so they don't get suspicious." "Thanks, sis. I just don't want the girls to be on guard," I told her. The next morning, I left Sarah in charge of the girls and went into work. That afternoon, I visited Thelma in the hospital. She mentioned that Sarah had come by with the girls for about an hour earlier. For some reason, I got this urge to just ask Thelma if there was anything she needed to tell me. I think it caught her off guard. She just started rattling off a list of bills and things that needed fixing at home. She clearly didn't get what I was really asking. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah sat me down at the kitchen table and gave me a serious look. "Well, I don't know who this Frank is, but I think you really need to figure out what's going on," she said. I asked, "So, you talked to the girls? What did they say?" Sarah shook her head. "Nope, I set Marcy on it. I figured the girls wouldn't see her as an adult, and, well, you know how kids talk. From what Marcy learned, Thelma and Frank used to chat outside the school while Thelma waited for the girls. Supposedly, Frank is divorced, and his kids go to the same school, but his ex-wife has custody and doesn't let him see them much. So, He's supposed to be watching them from the playground. I frowned. But why would Thelma need to keep that from me? Sarah looked serious. Marcy asked the same thing. The girls say Frank's ex-wife works at your company and that maybe Thelma was worried you'd tell her about Frank being at the school. I thought for a second. Well, I guess that's an explanation, but honestly, it doesn't make much sense. Why would Frank's ex-wife see him there anyway? And when Marcy pressed for more details, it got even weirder. Neither Tracy nor Helen knows who Frank's kids are. It's a small school. That just doesn't add up. What's more, sometimes Frank shows up at the park after school when Thelma brings the girls. He's even there during school holidays, and apparently, he's joined them at the shopping center more than once, buying the kids treats and snacks. Sarah shook her head. Look, something doesn't add up. Little brother, you've got to get to the bottom of this, and fast. Maybe Thelma was planning to meet Frank when she got hurt and that's why he called the house. I hesitated, then asked, you think Thelma's having an affair? Sarah shrugged. I don't know, but something's off. We need to figure this out. I'm glad you said we because I'm starting to lose track of everything. Sarah warned me, don't go flying off the handle. There could be a reasonable explanation, but honestly, I doubt it. Think back, has Thelma done or said anything strange lately? Not Thelma, but I did have something odd happen. I told Sarah about being followed and about those two women who tried to cozy up to me at the pub. Sarah listened, but she couldn't figure that out either. The next day, things went about the same. Thelma's ankle was starting to get better, and the nurses thought she'd be home by the weekend. That evening, once the kids were asleep, Sarah seemed especially on edge. She waited until we were alone in the kitchen before she blurted out, "What color was the car that followed you?" I said, "It was a maroon Ford Granada." "Why?" She nodded. "Close enough. The girls called it dark red. I think it's this Frank guy who's been following you." And Marcy found out something else. The girls have been inside that car. They described the inside in detail, said how big it was, how soft the seats were, and even mentioned the child locks. Kids wouldn't notice the child locks unless they'd been inside. I shook my head. You're right. That matches what I thought. I called Bill Wilkins today and asked him to use some police contacts to try to find out who those cars belong to. Sarah gave me a wry smile. Smart move, bro. And you owe Marcy a big thanks for all her detective work. I laughed. Yeah, I know. She's almost as sneaky as her mom. Sarah smirked back. Not sure if that's a compliment or not. Friday morning, I got a call from Bill Wilkins at the office, pretty early, too. Bill let me know that the maroon Granada was registered to a man named Frank Williams, and apparently, he was already known to the police. The other two cars that had been following me were rentals from a low-budget hire company. Oddly enough, one of those cars hadn't even been returned, and the man who rented both had used fake documents. That afternoon, after making a few calls, I headed over to the hospital to pick up Thelma. Before she knew I was there, I had a quiet conversation with the nurse I'd been talking to all week. With a little encouragement, she admitted that a man had been visiting Thelma every afternoon after I left. She said it struck her as odd, since he never brought anything for Thelma, not even a get-well card. Most folks bring at least a card or some flowers. I figured Frank Williams wouldn't want to leave any evidence around for me to get suspicious about. Guys like him are usually pretty sneaky when they're up to no good. But if Frank thought he was going to get away with whatever he was plotting, he had another thing coming. That evening, when we got home, Thelma seemed surprised that the girls weren't at the door to greet us. As she hobbled inside on her crutches, she asked where they were. I sent them to my folks for a few days, I said. Thought it would give you a chance to get yourself sorted. Oh, that wasn't necessary, Thelma replied, settling down on the sofa. I would have preferred if they were here. I think it was necessary, I told her. We've got a lot to straighten out in the next couple of days, and I don't want the girls getting upset about grown-up problems. What things? Thelma asked, just as Sarah came into the room with a tray of tea and coffee. Oh, Sarah, you're still here? You didn't have to stay, I'm sure I can manage the girls and myself now. Sarah set the tray down and said, with a tone that left no doubt, I'm not here for you, Thelma. I'm here for my brother. Thelma's face lost all its color as she turned and looked at me. What's this about? She asked. That's what I want to know, I said, keeping my voice steady. What's going on between you and Frank Williams? Thelma looked from Sarah to me and back again. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. Then she finally spoke. I guess you've figured it out then, she said quietly. I'm sorry, but I've fallen for someone else. I didn't want to hurt you, but I'm going to divorce you. I want to be with Frank. Just like that? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Yes. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you for weeks. I just didn't want to hurt you more than necessary. Sarah started to say something, but a voice from the hallway interrupted. That's all I needed to hear. I'll be in touch. It was a woman's voice, someone from the social services, I figured, who'd been listening in. We heard the front door close a moment later. I exchanged a look with Sarah and turned back to Thelma. Well, that's considerate of you, Thelma, but it doesn't quite add up. You got Frank to try and set me up, didn't you? Was the plan for me to get caught with one of his friends so you could divorce me and go after maintenance money? I guess you thought I'd have to pay to support your new life while you moved in with him. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said. What setup? If you really don't know, you better ask your boyfriend. Here's how it's going to be. You've got the weekend to pack your things and get out of my house. My lawyer's already drawing up divorce papers, you'll have them to sign on Monday. You can't do that. I should get the house for the children's sake. Not a chance, I said. You and Frank are not getting anywhere near our girls. I'll allow visits, but only with a social worker or me present. Social services are getting a court order for that tonight. You can't do that. She protested. Oh, but they can. And they will. Once they found out about Frank Williams, and that you'd let him around the girls, they've been nothing but helpful. You're not going to be allowed unsupervised visits, and I think the police will want to talk to you, too. Why would the police want to talk to me? Thelma asked, genuinely confused. Sarah jumped in, determined to have her say. What did you think Frank was doing hanging around the school? The man has a criminal record a mile long. He's not interested in you, Thelma. He's after your daughters. Thelma looked shocked, glancing from Sarah to me and back again. That's not true. Frank wouldn't do anything like that. Oh no? Do you know where he spent the last 7 years? He was working abroad, I thought. Somewhere in Asia. Sarah shook her head. No, he was in prison. Parkhurst, on the Isle of Wight. You can call that abroad if you like. And now that the police are involved, we'll find out if anything happened. If I find out that man hurt my kids, I'll never forgive you, Thelma. Thelma went pale and then fainted. We ended up having to call an ambulance because she wouldn't come around. After that, I heard that her father or brother came and took her home from the hospital. I never saw her again except when we signed the divorce papers. Thelma realized there was no point fighting for custody. Social services still had a court order against her for putting the girls at risk. It later came out that Thelma had left the girls with Williams a few times when she was out running errands. The experts who spoke to my daughters told me they were confident nothing had actually happened. They figured Williams was still in what they called the grooming phase, and hadn't tried anything yet because he didn't want to scare them off. Legally, Williams hadn't committed a crime the police could make stick. They suspected he'd stolen the rental car, but since everything unraveled before he made his next move, they couldn't prove what he was planning. I asked the police why they thought Williams stole the car, and the inspector just looked at me and said, honestly, you might not feel lucky right now, but you are. The last woman Williams fooled was a widow. Her husband died in a suspicious hit and run. We can't prove what Williams was planning, but we have our suspicions. If he sticks around here, we'll be watching him closely. I gave the officer a look, and he leaned in and said, don't worry too much. Let's just say, if anything happens, it might take the officers watching him a little too long to respond. Of course, you never heard that from me, and if anything goes down, make sure you have a rock-solid alibi. There are always folks out there who want to give people like Williams the benefit of the doubt, but not me. In my book, he's nothing but dangerous. He added, and don't be too hard on your wife. Williams is a master manipulator. If you'd seen him in the interview room, you wouldn't believe a word he said was anything but the truth. Thelma never stood a chance against someone like him. She didn't really understand what he was until she read his file for herself. Looking back, I realize I might be lucky to have gotten out of it as I did. Williams was covering every angle. But once I found out what he was planning for my family, I knew there was no way I was just going to sit back and let it happen. I decided I'd wait until things calmed down, but I wasn't about to turn the other cheek. The next few years were honestly a bit of a blur. Things were always shifting. Thelma wasn't allowed to see the girls on her own. That was tough on everyone, not just her, but the girls too, since she couldn't just take them out or spend time with them like a regular mom. From what the police told me, and from hearing Thelma talk about it herself, I really don't think she ever had a fighting chance when it came to Williams. I know in my heart she'd never have let him hurt our daughters if she'd realized what was going on. I have to believe that, for my own peace of mind. After about a year, I decided to ask social services if they could ease up a little on the restrictions. I figured it was time, and since the girls had never been in state care, I still got the final say. They agreed, and Thelma got to see the kids a little more freely, but I was always careful. Thelma told me a couple of times that she hoped we might get back together. But I made it clear that was never going to happen. Even neighbors mentioned seeing William's car parked outside our place some days while the girls were at school. There was no convincing me that Thelma and Williams were just reading the Bible together. Well, maybe the part with all the begats, but I had my doubts. I told Thelma she ought to find someone else, and eventually, she did. The guy she met was actually a decent fellow, maybe a bit stubborn, but well-meaning. From what I heard, he even asked Thelma to marry him, but she said she couldn't until she came clean about her past. Once she told him her story, he listened in silence, got up, and just walked out of her life. 2 weeks after that, something wild happened. Thelma ran Williams down with her car outside the local police station. She'd seen him hanging around another school, called the police, and they brought him in for questioning. But when he got released, Thelma was waiting outside and, in a moment of desperation, she drove her car into him as he was walking on the sidewalk. Afterwards, she drove down to the river and tried to throw herself in. People say it was a suicide attempt, but honestly, knowing Thelma, I'm not so sure. She always did have a knack for drama, and from what I heard, there was a police car following right behind her. At first, she was charged with manslaughter, but those charges were dropped pretty quickly. The doctors said her mental state was so fragile she wasn't fit to stand trial. She spent about a month in a psychiatric hospital, but the staff decided she wasn't a risk to anyone and let her out on the condition she'd keep seeing a counselor. Social services, of course, clamped down again on her visits with the girls. That's pretty much how things ended up. Sarah's husband, Ralph, got a job working on the North Sea oil rigs, so Sarah and her family practically moved in with me for a while to help with the girls and handle Thelma's supervised visits. Eventually, Thelma's visits became less and less frequent, and honestly, years went by without us speaking. Plus, it was just before Helen's 10th birthday when this next part happened. One evening, Sarah, Ralph, and I were sitting in the kitchen, reminiscing about old times from when we were kids. The topic of our childhood summers in Weymouth came up. Ralph, out of nowhere, suggested we should all go back down there for a couple weeks that summer. Sarah jumped at the idea, and before Ralph and I even realized what was happening, she'd already invited our sister Ginny and her family to join us. We ended up renting 3 caravans next to each other at the same campsite our family used to stay at when we were kids. The children had a blast at the beach, and they loved it when we showed them all the old places where we used to play. We even ran into a couple of local folks we remembered from back in the day. One morning, I took Tracy and Helen for a walk along the cliffs. A lot had changed with the land eroding and the coastline shifting, but I was determined to find the tree where Harry and I used to carve our initials every year. After a bit of searching, we finally found it. Some of those old carvings were still visible. H&H, 1959, Tracy read aloud. I wonder who they were and where they are now? I just smiled. Well, one of them is standing right beside you, I said. You're kidding, Dad, Tracy laughed. Then who was the other H? Oh, she was just a friend, I replied. Helen jumped in, all excited. Was she your childhood sweetheart, Dad? I hadn't expected that question. I suppose, in a way, she was. I spent a lot of happy holidays here with her when I was your age. But I'm not sure you could really call her my sweetheart. I only ever kissed her once. Tracy grinned. Was it a nice kiss? I couldn't tell if she was trying to embarrass me or if she really wanted to know. Yes, it was. I'd have loved to have kissed her more, but she didn't come back the next year. Oh, that's sad. Were you very upset? Yeah, I was, I admitted, but if you don't mind, let's change the subject. We moved on, but the rest of the holiday, everywhere we went, the girls kept asking if I'd ever been there with Harry. Sarah and Ginny caught on quick and would always answer before I could brush it off. Even the cakes and treats they made started coming out decorated with H&H on them. I pretended to be annoyed, but honestly, we'd all end up laughing. When the vacation was over and we got back home, things only got crazier. My parents, with a little prompting from Tracy and Helen, dug out all the old family photos from those Weymouth holidays, photos of me and Harry as kids. They showed them all to the girls. I'll give my daughters credit, Harry's birthmark was plain to see in those pictures, but neither of my girls ever mentioned it or asked about it. I don't know if Sarah or Ginny had talked to them about it, or if they just didn't think it was important, but it was never brought up. The next year, We went back to Weymouth again, just me, the girls, Sarah, and Marcy. Ralph was supposed to join us but backed out last minute, claiming something came up with his job. I was surprised at how calmly Sarah took it, considering how much time Ralph was already away on the rigs. We managed to squeeze everyone into my car, luggage piled up on the roof, and made the trip down. The first couple of days were just easygoing fun. Then, on Tuesday morning at breakfast, my girls announced they wanted to go find the tree with the initials again. Around 10, we set off. The 3 girls were in high spirits, singing and dancing along the way for no reason other than just being happy. When we reached the tree, Tracy ran up ahead, then started shouting, "Yes, yes, he did it. He did it." All 3 girls crowded around the tree, and when Sarah and I walked up, they stepped back to let us see. Just below the old 1959 carving was a new one, H&H 1982. I just stared at it for a few seconds, not really believing what I was seeing. Then, out of the bushes, Ralph appeared, with a couple of kids I didn't recognize. "She says you'll know where to find her," Ralph said. "She told me to tell you she's where you used to spy on the courting couples. She wants to see you in private." I don't think I even said a word to Ralph. I just took off at a jog to our old hiding spot. When I got there, it was empty. Feeling disappointed, I started to turn back, and that's when Harry jumped out, just like she used to when we were kids. "Geez, Harry, you about scared the life out of me," was all I could get out. She grinned. "Well, it makes a change from you sneaking up on me." We started talking and fell right back into our old banter, like nothing had changed. We walked back to the tree together, and by then, everyone else had wandered off. As we made our way back to the caravan, I filled Harry in on my life, well, the highlights anyway. Harry told me that after her dad passed away, her mom couldn't afford the caravan anymore and had to sell it. She said she'd been just as upset as I was that we lost touch. As the years went on, her mom remarried, and her new stepdad spent a fortune on early laser treatments to have Harry's birthmark removed. It wasn't perfect, but it made a huge difference for her confidence. Then Harry told me something that really stuck with me. She said, aside from the surgery, nothing in her life ever gave her as much self-esteem as meeting me when we were kids. She said I was the only child who never made a comment or even asked about her birthmark. She went on to tell me she'd married a soldier, had 2 wonderful kids, but sadly, her husband was killed in a training accident in 1978. Since then, she'd been living with her stepdad after her mother passed away from a stroke. That's where Ralph had tracked her down, don't ask me how. Later, Sarah told me Ralph had half the guys on his oil rig near Bath asking around for her. Eventually, someone down in Bath remembered the girl with the boy's name and the birthmark on her face. That was all Ralph needed. He tracked Harry down a few weeks before our holiday, but everyone decided to keep it a secret from me until the big moment at the tree. Sarah later told me there were a couple times she thought Tracy and Helen were going to let the secret slip. So, for the rest of our vacation, Harry and her 2 kids stayed in our caravan with us. Just to be clear, Harry and I didn't go rushing into any romance. Our friendship had always been something special, and now we were taking the time to get to know each other again as adults. Was there a spark? Absolutely. Could it turn into something more? I honestly hoped so, and judging by the way my girls kept grinning at us, I think they did too. Even Harry's kids seemed to pick up on it, and everyone gave us plenty of space so we could spend time together in Weymouth, just like old times. At the end of the holiday, Ralph and Sarah took Tracy and Helen back home, while I drove Harry and her 2 children, Russell and Claire, back to Bath. And life, as always, just kept rolling along. Plus. April 2006. After a wild 6 months of back and forth on the M4, Harry and her kids finally moved in with me and my girls. Suddenly, our house was full of life and noise, but it felt right. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing at first. Not long after they moved in, Helen and Tracy started calling Harry Mom, and decided to start calling their own mother Thelma. Harry and I tried to talk them out of it. Harry even ignored them if they called her Mom. But that plan didn't stand a chance, not with Russell and Claire repeating everything my girls said. In no time, if Harry answered her kids, she was also answering mine. That's how kids are, they'll outmaneuver you every time. I'll admit, it took some getting used to, and Thelma was not exactly thrilled. I'm not sure what was said between her and the girls, but in the end, she went along with it, mainly because the girls were dead set on things going their way. Harry once told me she thought Tracy and Helen might have threatened to cut off contact with Thelma if she made too big a deal of it. I was honestly surprised sometimes by how much resentment the girls felt towards Thelma, and it only seemed to grow as they got older. One day Harry pointed out that my daughters weren't stupid, they eventually pieced together what almost happened to them, and understood why those social workers and police kept asking them all those strange questions years before. That explained a lot. Eventually, Harry and I tied the knot. We didn't make a big fuss, just a quiet ceremony in Bermuda, with a couple of locals as witnesses. We kept it our little secret for a while. It was amazing how long it took for people to notice Harry had started wearing another ring. As the years went by, Thelma's mental health took a hit. It didn't help that she kept ending up with the wrong kind of men. When Tracy married her stepbrother Russell, Thelma was just well enough to come to the wedding and act the proud mom. She actually looked better than she had in years, and her dad got to walk her down the aisle. Sadly, he passed away not long after, and then Thelma's brother had to step in and have her admitted for treatment. She's spent a lot of time in and out of a private clinic ever since, which, I'll be honest, her brother and I both helped pay for. I guess I just feel it's my responsibility, for the girl's sake. Harry and I, though, we've built a wonderful life together. Now that all the kids are grown and have their own lives, we spend most of our time at a little cottage near Weymouth. We love walking those old paths we knew as children, sometimes with grandkids running ahead of us, making new memories in the same old places. Life goes on.